What I want to talk about today about is satellite and aerial imagery. It's a little bit exotic topic for an AGA conference, but I think many people are not really aware about what kind of developments we have seen so far in the last years on the topic of advanced imagery. Okay. First I will talk a little bit about the history of aerial images, satellite images, and how they are being used. Then give a quick overview about the military intelligence systems, how they have developed, and what kind of systems are being used today. And some commercial systems that are available today. Some words about resolution. I will hopefully show some examples, some simple methods of analysis that everybody can learn just to do the experience, and some more advanced methods, and give an overview of what to expect in the next years. Historically, the aerial image business has been the military business. The first things that came anywhere near what you know today about aerial imaging were the balloons that were equipped with the big plate cameras in the First World War and a little bit before, where really adventurous people jumped off the balloon and made images of the enemy troops. Then it developed quite rapidly in the Second World War. We saw the first specialized aerial reconnaissance plans that have been specially constructed to occupy the camera and the guy who visits the enemy troops and takes photographic images of them. After World War II, the Cold War did a really lot for bringing up the school spy photography business. The main race between airplanes and aerial defense found its presumed end in the U-2 incident. It was when an American was being shot down with an U-2 spy plane, which is a huge black plane over Russia and or Soviet Union was then, and it basically put an end to the aerial reconnaissance business above Russia, because no further US president wanted to risk votes for having shot down American pilots over Russia. So the satellite thing needed to go on. The first satellite program that's now nearly completely known because it has been declassified was the Corona program. It was the first military system in the US and in the world. It was, from today's point of view, technical curiosity, because what they did was shooting up a big camera in a satellite and taking a lot of images and returning the film back to Earth as a little capsule. The capsule descended through the outer atmosphere into the inner atmosphere, and there unflapped in parachute. And since the Americans were really paranoid about the Russians getting to know what they were doing there, they catch the parachute in air and tried to calculate the landing area in a way that it was always over sea. So they put in a salt block in the wall of the capsule. And after 48 hours, the salt block was dissolved, and the capsule was running full of water and going down into the water. So they really wanted not to let the Russians to know what they were up to there. The power incident, as I said, and the direction of the Berlin Wall triggered a massive investment into satellite programs. They were running since 1957, where the Sputnik shock put a huge boost on that, and then after Poland and after Berlin Wall, the Americans really wanted to have something that the Russian defense could put down. And this Corona program was quite successful. It had the usual amount of bureaucracy in there and the usual things that happen with large American intelligence programs, but it was overall successful. And the interesting thing about Corona is that it's declassified now. So you can buy all the images from 1960 to 1972 for a token price at the what's called National Imagery Resources Data Center or something like that, some US government agency. There are also some books having been published in recent times about this program. It's very interesting to see because they had unique kind of programs. Never anybody had before had deployed large amounts of film into the vacuum of space, or near vacuum of space, and their problem was things that the elastic from the rolls that transported the film over time built up an electric charge and discharged on the film, so which was in spark and ruined half the film when it happened. And they had no model for calculating that problem at that time. It was end of 50s. And what they did was they did a purely experimental approach. They just ordered huge quantities of these rolls from the manufacturer, put them into apparatus that ran huge amounts of film over that and measured which built up electric discharge and which not. And just built into the few satellites that they shot up, the 5 or 6 from the 100 that didn't build an electric charge. So it was the basic model of doing it. And they had a number of interesting camera systems in there. They also used refurbished or rebuilt cameras from normal manufacturers for mapping purposes. What they get from Corona images is resolutions between 6 and at the end a little bit better than 2 meters. In the early beginning it was about between 10 and 50 meters. And they also have mapping cameras for having huge areas to drive. The problem is that by the laws of optics, the more focused you are on an object, the smaller the area you can photograph. If you think that the Soviet Union and the other interesting countries for the US covered over 1/3 of the Earth, it was a little bit impractical to just only have a camera that focuses on a small object like searching for an ICBM installation. It was the main task of Corona. So they had mapping cameras, and one of these mapping cameras they fitted from I think it was a Hasselblad standard camera, and they needed to modify this and that, and then they found out that they had a problem. When they put on the normal stock camera into space, they tried to do a vacuum chamber, fine powder, which was being used to make the shutter better gliding, dissolved onto the film in the vacuum, because these cameras were not built for vacuum. So they convinced a Californian optics company to buy a huge balloon, which was the smallest thing available, with a special vacuum tested fluid that made the shutter glide appropriately. They used about 20 milliliters of that fluid, and but in the end, still this was 1 gallon of the stuff, and that was about $1,500 at that time per liter. So it was okay. They were a special customer. So another thing that is very interesting about the Corona program that's being now declassified is doubling the amount of money that is really going into such a large project and what is going into cover projects. So they had about 5 to 7 cover projects that were something that sounded vaguely like it could be matching with the activities going on in that building, but were not the actual activities. Like they had something going on with optics that were sounded like, okay, it could be possible, but was in reality the building of the satellite camera that the company named imagery. And so up to 1/3 of the whole budget for one black project goes into cover projects and security. So only 2/3 are going into the actual project. So the Russians were not sleeping either. They were the first to space, but they had their own kind of problems. They built a system called Zenit. The first successful image was Zenit 2, it was in Cosmos 7. The real space exploration of the Russians started with Cosmos 1 using the priority. After they were barely able to guarantee that they had an object in space that could keep an atmosphere and could be kept from falling back to Earth uncontrolled, the first thing they did was shooting up a camera. One thing that you need to know is having a camera in space is incredibly difficult because you have a free moving object. Everything mechanically that moves inside that object makes the whole thing jitter. So So, and you need to stabilize this thing so that it doesn't rotate, so you need to have gyroscopes and all kinds of stuff. So it's a really, really mechanical problems. The Russians were not that rich as the American counterparts, so they returned the camera and the film, not just the film as the Americans did, throw away the camera. And that gave them, after they had 2 years lost with internal troubles, they gave them a head start in terms of quality development because they could debug the cameras. They were returning the cameras, and so they could debug the cameras and see what the problem was, and gradually improving the cameras so that they got a much quicker resolution increase than the Americans had. The Russians are still using photo-return satellites simply because the modern electro-optical satellites are damn too expensive when it comes to the data, and these film-return satellites do the job for a lot of purposes. So, for instance, at one of these crises between Israel and Egypt, they fired up one satellite on one photo return satellite every 4 days. So that they kept up for nearly 2 months. So it was like bam, 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 everything they had. And they returned the satellite, loaded the film, put it on top of a rocket, and bam. So that was how they are doing quick reconnaissance in these days. Okay, today you can buy the results from these satellites. They are called KVR, and KVR 1000 is the satellite stuff that's also being sold today on the internet at the terrace level. That is what you can expect from such a KVR satellite. What we see is an about 2 meter resolution image of the old single intelligence installation of the NSA and the Teufelsberg in Berlin, Germany. What we see here is quite interesting. It doesn't look like much, but we have here an access road going to that thing, and we see that it's a clearly defined thing. Plus here's the exit road, and here we see the black line, obviously something like perimeter control or something like that. But you couldn't see much of buildings. You could very think, okay, that could be a tower, but only if you know something about the object. It was not really what you wanted. So the resolution race was going on, and there were I don't know how many Corona satellites, but several dozen, and they were continuously developed. They included in the end 2 cameras to stereoscopic images, which increases the possible resolution that you can see objects of. And today's satellites have 10 centimeters resolution. That's the resolution that you get from a military PO class satellite. There are even sources claiming that the quite recent resolution is about 6 centimeters. That is quite good. It's far away from reading license plates. If everything happens in I can show you a little nice example where this license plate reconnaissance business is debunked a little bit more in depth. But 10 centimeters resolution is quite a lot. So 10 centimeters resolution is, they have this national image interpretation reconnaissance scales in the US where they have some nice examples like, okay, 6 centimeter resolution is if you can recognize the little wing in front of that Russian anti-aircraft rocket. Or 10 centimeters resolution is if you can identify the niche of an installation where they were shooting SS-16 or whatever from. So they have all these natural and everyday occurring examples for their resolutions there. But from these kind of things that are being published or that are leaked or going through by Freedom of Information Act research, you can guess a lot about how far they are, what kind of resolutions they have, and how their mechanisms look like. One big problem that they have is image interpretation, because that's something that can be done by software if you have standard objects, like counting a lot of tanks that are standing somewhere is not a real problem, or looking for a Russian anti-aircraft site is not a real problem, because they always have some kind of Star of David pattern that if you see it once, you recognize it everywhere. But other things are more difficult. For instance, they had an count of Russian ICBM sites in the 60s where they're looking for these really, really huge rockets to throw atomic warheads to the US. These are major installations. It's not like a rocket, you know, from Paris, but that's more like a rocket where you want to shoot a spaceship up. So that is a real installation. One thing how they identified these ICBM sites, even if they were camouflaged, was because these rockets are so huge, the streets going through these sites to transport the rockets on, they could only have a certain angle of bending because the rockets were too long. They wouldn't fit through the street if the street was too narrow. So they developed all kinds of hints and stuff for identifying typical Russian installations. And it is an interesting game, but it's really difficult, and they never solved the problem of having enough people and having enough dissemination stuff for the things until they got to start electronics. Nowadays, the Q class satellites are sending up the images digitally. They are not sending them down, but up, because they don't want everybody to read their mails. So they're sending the images up to a satellite network that flies on higher orbits and gets the thing transported to the other side of the earth where they need to go down to the Pentagon or wherever they have their stuff. Okay, this is the same installation at circa 25 centimeters resolution, and now it gets even more interesting. So the first thing is we see, okay, it's an access road, and we have these brown things here. These look like radomes. Could be everything from radar to satellite dishes. They don't want to have your enemy knowing where the satellite dish is turned to. Then we have another tower here. You see that there's a tower by the shadow here. You see that? Even if you don't know what to look for a shadow, then you get it better. So what could we do with this image? We could, for instance, guess how many employees are working there. Or do we do that by counting the parking spaces here? Okay. That is the kind of tricks that they developed over a long time. So another thing that we could see is obviously the number of employees is not the same number of employees that has been planned for the facility, because here we have parking grounds that have been made later. That there was some other installation there. And one of the most useful things is photographing such an object every year. So that's what everybody was doing there. The Russians were doing, the Americans and vice versa. They had analysts that were responsible for an object, like that missile installation in the Ural, or that kind of stuff. And they were responsible for analyzing all kinds of information that was coming from every source, and they were also responsible for the tasking of that re-imaging. These tasking problems, tasking means determining the point when you need another photo of that image, of that object, is incredibly difficult. In the beginning, they had a huge problem because they couldn't influence the satellite once it was in space. The Corona satellites had a program stamped on a Müller tape, like the what's it called? The tape, the holes punched in it, and these holes, punch cards, and these holes determined when the camera was to go off and on. And the problem was, once the thing was in space, they couldn't switch the camera off even if they knew that there were only clouds above the object. And they had return close about 60 to 70% images only with clouds in the beginning. So, if you look at the data server, you can buy the Corona images. You see that they really, really tried hard to photograph the border between East and West Germany at the time the war was erected. But they couldn't get it. They photographed clouds and clouds and clouds and clouds. So, okay, bad for them. So that game developed to a point where the Russians were actively seeking for weather anomalies on their territory, which is huge. Where they had over 90% cloud cover all year. So because the problem is if you're doing something secret that there are satellites going over you want to have your secret stuff into the hole and the thing is over. So if you have to move it in every 20 minutes, it's a little bit stressy. Yeah? So they were looking for areas with their clouds. Okay. The Americans countered, of course, by actively exploring the thing of radar satellites. And radar satellites are an interesting thing. It's called synthetic aperture radar.
Okay, I'm going to start the encoder again.
What it's doing is imaging the Earth's satellite and using the moving of the satellite.
That's impossible. My encoder was unrunning.
Artificial enlargement of the antenna.
This
And
is
by that they get,
1.
meanwhile, below 1 meter resolution.
I didn't copy that. What did you
Rumors
say?
are 400 centimeters. Okay, it's rumors. And the new satellites are combined beasts. They have synthetic aperture radar and images. So if you would have radar, or if you would have an image that goes to the infrared spectrum, we could possibly see what is happening inside these radomes. If there is a satellite which is actively working in one direction, it's a communication antenna, not a reception antenna, you will see the heating of the hole from the radio energy. So you see it if you have an infrared image. Okay, this is an artist's conception of a modern American image satellite. It's derived from various sources, rumors, all kinds of stuff that have been floating around. They have changed the configuration insofar as the image mirror is not on that axis, but going down there, so they can move that mirror here in order to have monitor objects that are to the side of the path of the satellite. If they would only go down, it would only be a very small path. And synchronous with that is that radar antenna, so they could do images that are both optical and radar. Okay, there's the usual kind of stuff that you need, the multimeter, downlink dish, uplink dish, data relay, and so on. One extremely good source for information about this, unfortunately, is www.fas.org. There was a research scientist named John Pike, who actively got into the whole business of image interpretation by commercial satellite stuff, doing testbed treaty verification on its own with satellite imagery and so on. And he's basically the father of civilian use of these kinds of sub-high resolution imagery for political causes. Okay, the optics is quite simple, or not. It's a multi-mirror reflection system. It's a secondary mirror for the image is not right here. And in the end, you have the imaging plane. The first generation of image satellites had tubes in there because at that point the 6CDs were not developed far enough, so they used imaging tubes like in the early TV cameras. And one interesting point is that the optical system is nearly identical to the Hubble satellite. And also the rest of the system is nearly identical to the Hubble satellite. And incidentally, the Hubble satellite was being developed by the same company that built these satellites. But there's a really good book about this whole Hubble thing. It's called the Hubble Wars. And that guy has some really interesting insights. For instance, one thing that the Hubble designers got from them was a secret paint. That paint is secret because it does not reflect any light at all at any frequency. It's below measurability, and it's called Marietta Black. And that is being used to paint the inside of the tube here, so that you don't have any stray reflections from the inside of the tube to the mirror, which would degrade the image capability. Another thing that they didn't get from them was information that if you have a really high resolution imaging satellite, we have a problem with your solar panels. You remember that there was, in the beginning of Hubble, there were a lot of promises, the resolution is not high enough, that the sharpness is bad, and so on. A lot of that trouble was from vibration that came from the solar panels heating up and cooling down again, and heating up and cooling down again. And that added a vibration to the system that the gyros were not able to compensate. So the whole thing started to jitter. And on a conference years later, the guy who wrote the book was being told by the guys from the black part of the universe, yeah, why didn't you think about it? That was logical. We had a problem with that satellite 15 years ago. So another thing that I considerably pissed off was that obviously the NSA has already adaptive optics working in satellites. It means that the mirror image here is not a fixed mirror, but a flexible mirror. And with the flexible mirror, you can compensate for image distortions through atmosphere turbulence in real time if you have enough computing power. And that would have been one thing that would save the Hubble problem. Because one thing that you also can do with an active mirror is compensating for optical errors that you have done in other parts of the system, because you essentially can manipulate any parameter of the optics there. Okay, so reading about Hubble tells a lot about the Kilo class satellites, but not in every aspect. Okay, this is in comparison in the concept of the Corona system. The system had a quite different approach to the camera system, because the camera system was moving in that way, because the satellite is flying, and you want to have the camera focused on the object flying over, so the camera was moving with the object. And that kind of stuff is not necessary anymore, so the mechanical considerations are quite less stringent there. The next slide, yeah. That is what you get to see from American imagery today. You see that it's in the image that has been used in the Gulf War for the propaganda for the accuracy of the weapons. You see here bunker sites from the roads. You can guess that it is bunkers for airplanes, because that's a typical pattern for if you want to move airplanes fast in one direction and have service access to the rear of that. Obviously, they show quite good there, possibly in other areas not. What we can see here is, and the image is a little bit useful if it's a satellite image or not, because one of the interesting parts is here to see the fine structures of the hall. And if you know a little bit about buildings, such buildings and stuff like that, you would guess that it's about 30 centimeters. These structures here, these are bars that are supporting the roof of the hall. So it's say, okay, this is about 30 centimeters. These little black lines here, and so it could also be that it's not an declassified satellite image, but an area image from a very high-flying plane. Yeah, this is a typical image of a not very precision bombardment, because you see. Okay, one thing that is interesting in the image is these are oil tanks here, and one of the interesting questions that you have if you're analyzing an object is how high are these objects? One thing that you can do to calculate it is, if you know all the parameters of how the satellite or the aeroplane flow, and where the nadir means the geometric middle point of the image is, then you can calculate from these parameters and now at what time the image has been taken, the height of these things by measuring the shadow and the distance to the middle of the image. Yeah. Okay, the civilian sources available are a few. The first one that got to the market was the company Space Imaging, former called Ikonos after the satellite. And they are the first who successfully launched an imaging satellite after losing one. There was the paranoia was big after they lost the first one, and especially after that loss, there was some more agreements on the shuttle control policy. To talk later about. The resolution that you can buy from them is 1 meter monochrome, in 4-meter multispectral. They also have combined products where they use the monochrome product to sharpen the multispectral product, which is quite nice images. You can buy them also auto-rectified, means that they have removed all the geometrical distortions from the terrain on the different heights and satellite angles, so that you have a flat image that is like the piece of Earth is flat, and you can count pixels to determine lengths and distances. The problem with them is they are quite expensive. The minimum order is $6,000 for an own tasking. Tasking means that you can say, okay, I want to have an image of that area. They have a 20% cloud cover policy. That means that if there are 20% of the image covered with clouds, it's your problem, not theirs. The best way to get images from them is use the archived images. These are available for $1,000. The minimum order gives you 2 patches 11 by 11 kilometers in monochrome, and one archive image is also 11 by 11 kilometers. That's the image size that you get from these, all for $1,000. The standard format for that is RAW, which means that the images is a little bit bigger. If you need it really quick, they have a policy of not giving you the image before 72 hours. Why so? Before they had a policy, their biggest customers were the defense ministries of countries that were involved with Russia, because if you have a real-time imaging capability, that kind of money, $6,000 per one task involved, nobody's thinking about that. Yeah? So they introduced a 3-day period to make their product unattractive for buffering capabilities, but it's still useful for bar planning capabilities, of course. In interesting cases, like if John Pike goes on and says, okay, I want an image of the Israeli nuclear reactor in Dimona, then it took 30 days for delivery unannounced. And they also had needed to degrade the image by law to 2 meters resolution. So there was this law from the Congress saying, okay, that area of the world, and that's specific as Israel, cannot be sold in image form from satellite or any other source to anybody else better than 2 meters. Interesting enough, the Palestinian Authority managed to get quite detailed aerial images of Israel officially from the Israeli Geographical Institute in about 15 centimeters resolution. It was one thing that the Israelis were really shocked about when they discovered it. Okay, these shutter control policies, we'll talk a little bit later about their strategy, but okay. And quite new source is ImageShot International. That's a consortium of Israeli, Russian, and US companies that just became operational about a week ago. They sell about, it's not 1.5, it's not 1.8 meters monochrome. They're all this technology called oversampling, that they use the same sensor twice to get in a high resolution. They get about 1 meter monochrome. They have not yet announced pricing for their product. But what they have announced is that they will provide imagery of Israel in 1 meter resolution without American interference. And the Americans were quite angry about ImageShot International because they allegedly violated a lot of patents from American companies for Israel for imaging, but the satellite was being built by Israeli defense industries with help from the Russians, and so it's quite a political thing there. The source of the biggest coverage and the lowest prices is these Giga 1000 frame return capsule satellite images. They are being sold by TerraServer. That's a Microsoft outfit that is selling all image images. The quality I've seen for some applications is okay, for some it's not okay. One thing in image interpretation is getting used to the optics. The human eye is not really accustomed to the aerial view, so it's looking out of the airplane window and the really not going to you're getting to the view if you're doing it a while, trying to actively analyze what object is what and how does it look like. Another factor is that the properties of the sensor are determining how the image looks. If you have a multispectral sensor that is going deep into the infrared area, the image can look completely strange. Unfortunately, I don't have it because it's on the crash computer. And another thing that can completely disorient you is features like shadow, how the shadow is lying. Often it will happen that you mistake a shadow for an object, or vice versa. The light, how the sun is shining at that moment, the snow is extremely interesting. If you have snow on there, you wouldn't recognize anything. Another very simple trick is if you're not getting familiar with the image, you stand on that, please. One thing that really helps is rotating the image. I showed it in a moment. What really helps if you want to get into that game is get an aerial image city map of your city, of your hometown. They are available for most cities in Europe now. You can buy them for cheap, for 20 marks in most cases. And just walk around with it and try to get used to how this looks on the ground and how this looks on the city map. It's quite interesting. Okay. What we have here is not a really interesting intelligence agency installation, but a storage facility for natural gas in Berlin. Interestingly, these things here have nearly the same construction as the so-called elephant cages, which are the rectifying antennas of NSA. And if we rotate the image, you see it looks completely different. It's I can flip it. See, you see completely different things. So if you have it in that way, you wouldn't get the perspective right until you've seen the data image there. Okay. This is in 50 centimeters black and white per image. And the very simple method of determining the resolution of an image is car windows. Because you know how big a car window is, it's about that wide and that high. If you look on top of that, it's about that size. So if you can see a car window as individual pixels, so 2 or 3 pixels, like we have that visible there. Okay, on my screen you could see that car here has 3 pixel window, so it's about 50 centimeters resolution. I think to use that now. Okay. Okay. When you're starting to analyze an aerial image or a satellite image, the first thing that you should try to do is identify the location. Try it with a city map or try it with another map of the area where you think the image is from, and try to find where it is, because that helps you very much, because you can look for things that have any relation to each other. Then begins, just in your mind, begin identifying the easy objects, the things that are obvious, like trees, houses, cars, parking lots, stuff like that. And then move on to the more difficult things, like more difficult things like trash containers or windows or whatever you have in there, what you want to analyze. If you have identified a real difficult object, take a note for it, because it will help you later on if you stay into the game. One thing that you will learn after a while is trying to guess from things that you can see about things that you can't see. So, like if you're interpreting an image of a ship and you see huge antennas on top of the ship, you can look for something like a generator that provides the additional power for the signal installation that is obviously on that ship, if it has been refitted later. Or if you're looking at a tank facility where a lot of tanks moved or repaired, can easily look for signs of something like a gasoline storage facility, because it's obviously near. It's always depending on what you're looking for. Counting things is very interesting, as you have seen in the parking lot example. That is a thing that is also being used commercially, like determining the output of a pizza facility. That's something that can easily be done with aerial or satellite imagery. You're just counting the trucks that are going through the facility and going from the facility, and you all just count the loading docks that you have there, and you know how much load the facility can bear. So, and if you know about chemical processing, looking at the an aerial image from a chemical plant is quite interesting. You can see a lot of things like where goods are being delivered or not, or what kind of pipes are going from what point to what point. So if you have a basic understanding of the process going on at the facility, you will get a lot of things on aerial or satellite images. The only way to learn is try it and train yourself. It's not that difficult, it can be easily done. And I will put up the presentation on some web server, and then there will be an URL list on all those books and animation or whatever, where the basics of satellite interpretation are being taught. The problem is that most books that are in the public domain are just going for the usual things like what kind of trees are growing in that area, or what kind of soil is in that area, or the other usual urban planning things that are being taught in university. But nobody's really selling you a book that tells you how the military image interpretation works. Unfortunately. Okay. One very interesting thing is time series, as I told you. If you have the ability to pass multiple images from one area, even over the years, even if you have 20 years between, maybe you buying in Corona image of the area, getting to Terra server, buying in PVR image from the early 90s, and then you find another image at another source, and then you can easily find out how that object or that thing developed, like if it declined or if there was more personal move to, like it seems to talk back image. Stereo imaging is another interesting thing. It promises that you need a little bit of equipment. It's not that cheap, and I haven't found so far sufficient software systems that can be used as stereo images in the public domain, and I don't have the money for commercial stuff. The multispectral imagery is also very interesting, but that requires a lot of thinking, and because even if you're doing image processing to try to get features that are visible only in the infrared or whatever, then more like you would see that, or like you would expect to look at it. It takes a lot of experience to know, okay, this kind of reflection means that, like, okay, this kind of band in infrared reflection means that these trees are old and will die soon, or something like that. Another thing that can be done even without interpretation is taking a look at the archive databases, for instance, at ImageSat or space imaging, because they're putting every image into the database to sell it again. And you just need to look for an area like John Pike did with the Chinese coast, and what he found was that obviously the Taiwanese government, because who else would have an interest in that, has a weekly abonnement of the Chinese coast. Getting a weekly strip of the Chinese coast is one of the best monitored areas in the world, obviously, because they really want to know what is going on there. And it's okay, it costs them, I don't know, $150,000 a week, but it's not the kind of money that's interesting for them, because it's still below $2 million per year. So, and it's a lot cheaper than having the $500 million to shut up an image satellite. So, but okay, they know that the Chinese know that they know. Okay. And obviously they are much interested in airfields and science installations and one thing that I will touch on briefly is unmanned aerial vehicles, UAV. These are just planes without pilots. They are available in various models for civilian and, in the meanwhile, civilian and all the way around, for the military and civilian markets. The latest thing is one that was called Global Hawk. That was in the news some time ago. And it's an airplane the size of 7 to 7, not that small, flying for 36 hours and delivering imagery resolution 10 centimeters, also synchronous image and radar, and has live satellite uplinks like the spy satellites have, and it can fly without direct human interaction. That means that they can say, okay, fly over the Atlantic to Australia, take images from there, fly to wherever the next base is and land there, so that the command center staff go there and land. So, and okay, we all want to have such a toy, but it's a little bit expensive. The civilian models have been planned, but at this moment the military market is big enough. System price is below $50 million, because so if we happen to have a little bit venture capital over, then it would be. Huh? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. You can imagine what will happen if these things are in the civilian domain. Obviously, there's a market for buying such a thing and having it over Europe.